Hey guys, this is Shane here with Echo Soundworks, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at different levels of groove and how you can make your hi-hat patterns more groovy, more interesting, and ultimately more effective. So these techniques will work with literally any genre. I am going to be showing you how to use these and apply these techniques in a house track because I think it's a little bit more straightforward. So let's cut the intro short and dive right in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into this hi-hat pattern and start to tweak the velocity of some of the hits. The kick happens right on the downbeat, so there's really no point in having my first hit be really loud. So I'm going to bring up my velocity tool and we're going to make this about 50 velocity, so it's pretty quiet. Now I'm going to make this one kind of middle of the road, so we might keep this at about 80. This one's going to be a little bit harder. Let's make that about 110. And then we're going to bring this one down to about 80 as well. So we're going to soft, medium, hard, medium, and then we're going to go back to soft, right? And we're going to kind of repeat this pattern. All right, so I don't know how much I like the hits that are in the 110, so we're going to turn that down just a little bit. All right, so let's move on to the next concept, which is swing. Now, pretty much every DAW has their own way of handling swing, but I'll show you how to do it manually just so you know exactly what's going on. So if you wanted to apply swing to a hi-hat pattern manually, you're going to go to every other note. You're going to highlight them, and I'm holding down Shift, and that will be pretty universal for every DAW. You're going to go every other note, and then what you're going to do is you're going to nudge that note off of the grid. Now, you're not going to nudge it before the grid. You're going to nudge it after. So this is where the note would hit on an eighth note value, right? I'm not going to bring it back here. That's going to make it sound weird and tense. You're going to take it off of the grid. Now, you can move it just a little bit. You can move it a lot. Play around with it, but we're manually adding in swing right now. Now, you don't have to have every note that you're swinging be the same swing. If you want to take it to a real next level, you can go in and change and tweak each one. So that's going to add another level to the groove. It's going to humanize the pattern, because if you think about a human playing a hi-hat on a real drum kit, if they try to add swing, it's not ever going to be perfect, right? So that being said, a lot of DAWs have a way to achieve swing, and I can do that with this swing here. So I've already quantized this to an eighth note value, right? Now if I add swing, watch what happens to the notes here. If we highlight all the notes and I drag this up, you'll see that every other note is moving. Now if I crank it up to 100, it is a lot of swing. It almost is like there's a triplet feeling. It just doesn't have that third hit for the triplet. So that's way too much, obviously. So I'm going to dial it back. All right, so now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the process. We're actually going to pull up the sampler that's been housing this sample. So I pulled in one hi-hat sample into Logic's Drum Machine Designer, which is just an instrument or a plugin for handling drums if you're not a Logic user. So the actual sample that I'm using is quite a bit longer than we've been hearing. If we go to the actual sample waveform, you can see that there's a good amount of tail on this hi-hat. Now I like, especially with house, techno, anything that's 4 on the floor, I like using closed hi-hat samples that are a little bit longer in length because it allows me to do what I'm about to show you. So I went to the actual sample here and I turned down the decay on this. So when you hear this, it sounds like a really short hi-hat. But what we're going to do is we're going to use what's called modulation to open up the decay so we hear a little bit more of that sample when we hit the note or the hi-hat harder, which we've already done. We've already programmed in our velocity and our dynamic changes. All right, so I'm going to use a source and a target. We're going to use the velocity as the source because I want the velocity to tell this plugin when I hit it harder, open up that decay on the envelope. So I'm going to set the target to the amp envelope decay. So now when I turn this up, if I hit it soft versus hard, you hear the actual decay of the hi-hat now. I'm also going to add that same mod setup to the release of our envelope. So we're just going to select amp envelope release, and it's going to be a little bit less than the decay, but now the release and the decay will basically open up like this. You just won't see that happening visually with the sampler, but that essentially will be what's happening. when we have these harder hits. Now take a listen to our hi-hat pattern. So let's do it. Let's actually turn up the velocity a little bit more. And let's listen to it in context. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at is adding in other sounds that accentuate the groove you've already created. Now, this could be as simple as adding an open hi-hat on certain hits, or it could be as complex as bringing in an open hi-hat, a shaker, a tambourine, other percussive elements. So I've already done that because it took a few minutes to set up, but basically I just dragged in some different samples, chopped up a loop with those samples to create more of a groove. So you can see on my MIDI, the MIDI that we've been creating and working with this whole video up until this point, you see that there are now gaps and holes in it. All I've done is I've just muted some of the notes because now I have another percussive element, whether it's an open hi-hat or a shaker, for instance, on that section of the grid. So I just muted it. So let's listen to our kick and hi-hat now. And with the music. Since I met you, low vacancy. All right, so now's a good time to point out another element of groove, and that is just changing things over time. It doesn't have to be only rhythmically, it can actually be sample selection. So this open hat pattern is the most basic open hat pattern you could create for house music. It's just on the upbeat, right? 1 and 2. And now the thing that I did that makes it less beginner and less boring is each of these hits is a different sample. And then we have this pickup there. So when you layer that together with our closed hi-hat, there's more of a groove happening because we have these 3 different open hat samples. All right, so this next technique, I don't know if it has an actual name. I think of it as kind of ghost hats, ghost hi-hats. I know other producers do this. You do the same technique as well. If you guys know the name of this, drop it in the comments below. I'd like to actually know. Basically, the idea is to, once you establish your basic hi-hat pattern, which we've already done with our closed hi-hat and our open hats, bounce that or freeze that in place, and then throw on some effects, usually some time-oriented effects, like a delay or something that's going to change how it plays back. So I've already done that first step of the process here. And I used a delay from Soundtoys, and I used a triplet delay preset, tweaked it a little bit, bounced that again, and now we have this. So if I play that with our kick and other 2 hats, it's very bouncy. Now, what I like to do after this is, instead of just tucking that in really low in the mix, I like to mess around with a step sequencer or a rhythmizer or some type of gate plugin where I can actually change how this plays back over time. So here's one of my favorite ones called Gatekeeper. Basically, it's going to accentuate any audio that happens through this grid. And so I can actually turn whole sections of this hi-hat pattern off now. And what this does is it just makes it tighter in the mix, right? We don't hear as much of the delay, the sustain of the delay ringing out. So it's going to fit a little bit better with our kick and our other hats. I've mentioned this a few times throughout the course of this video. Groove doesn't just have to be tied to the idea of rhythm. It can also be tied to the idea of change over time. And we can change this over time with, obviously we've talked about with dynamics, volume, sample selection, of course, rhythm. But let's actually talk about now about stereo field. I'm going to load up Logic's stock tremolo plugin, which is for some stupid reason, the best way to use or do an auto pan or create an auto pan, to create an auto pan in Logic with default plugin. So this ghost hat pattern is now going to pan left and right. All right, so we play this all together. All right, so the last thing I want to show you is bringing in new sounds, new percussive sounds. I touched on this a little bit earlier in the video. Things like tambourines, shakers, other percussive elements. Now you can use loops, you can program these. I like to work with loops and basically chop up different loops, combine them to make a quote unquote new loop. So I dragged in a shaker loop from one of our packs here, and what I ended up doing was chopping it up quite heavily and using this as a call and response with other gaps within my hi-hat groove. So here is the shaker as is. And then what I did was I chopped that up, and then I chopped up our ghost hats from the previous section. So now there's this call and response. All right, so that's going to sum up this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can post those below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you guys aren't subscribed to our channel, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button. The support really does mean a lot to us. And if you guys haven't ever checked out our website, echosoundworks.com, definitely head on over there. There's a ton of free content, samples, loops, and presets. And of course, there's some premium sound sets and sample packs as well. And lastly, if you guys use Instagram, consider giving us a follow. We run a lot of contests, giveaways, and promotions on that platform. And I think you guys will like what we're doing over there. All right, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.